Is that on? Yes, it's working. Hello, everybody. Hello. Let me move this out to the front. A busy week. Yes, but it's interesting. I turned up and Pascal was feeling the same, actually. I'm intrigued. I'd love to know how she's going to teach my son how to sing in French. I'd love to be a fly on the wall, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, my week culminated yesterday with. So for those who don't know me, I'm Jonathan, one of the leaders here. That's my lovely wife over there, Claire. I've got 4 kids who are all here, and some of them learning French. It was very moment outside. And I had my week ended yesterday with me. My son was going to the cinema with his cousin to watch the film, so I dropped him off plenty of time and got to where I was going. We were going out for some of us were gathering for some food, and I get a phone call from my cousin saying, you know you've dropped him at the wrong cinema. So I dropped him at Rubery, and the film was on in Redditch. So then I had to leave, scoot to Rubery, take him to Redditch. Anyway, my kids are very gracious. Yeah. Right. So we're looking at John 6. Here we are. We're there today. So if you have a Bible or something like that, open up your Bible to John chapter 6. We're actually just going to look today at the feeding of 5,000. Just that first part of that. There's a story told of a young child going for a walk with their dad. And they get to this part in the walk where it's a really rickety bridge with bits of planks of the bridge missing, and the dad is a bit worried that the kid's going to fall through one of these. So it says to them, look, take my hand, hold my hand as we go over this bridge. And the young child's little boy looks up to his dad and thinks about it and says, no, Dad, you hold my hand. And his dad was a bit puzzled and said, what? Well, what's the difference? And he says, the little boy said, every difference. If something happens to me, and I'm holding your hand, there's every chance I might let go of your hand. But he says, if you're holding my hand, I know there is no chance that you will let go of my hand. And that's what we're looking at partly today in this. It's actually, the feeding of the 5,000 teaches us loads of stuff, but one thing it teaches us is that we can trust God, our Father. We can trust God, our Father. And that, I suppose, if you wanted to put a title to this, is about trust me. Trust me. Shall we look at the story? Let's go through the story. And we'll come back to that at the end. So this is John chapter 6. So if we can have the next. Yeah, that's working, that's great. So a bit of background actually. So this is one of the stories, there's only a few that appear in all the eyewitness accounts of Jesus. So that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and this appears in all of them. Just before this story happens, Jesus had found out that his cousin, who was John the Baptist, had been killed, been beheaded. So Jesus had found this out. He'd also, just before this, sent out all his disciples in pairs to go out and tell the villages about him and about God and about the kingdom of God that was coming. So he'd sent them all out on a bit of a mission. And so they'd all just come back, so they were quite tired. Jesus was obviously very tired, quite emotionally tired, I would have thought as well. And he found out that John the Baptist had just been killed. So he thinks, well, let's just all gather together. We're going to go away from everyone for a bit and have a bit of time out together to rest. So that we can, just help one another out and just chill out basically a bit. So that's where we are just before this story. So here's how the story starts. After all that, Jesus crossed over to the far side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. And a huge crowd kept following him wherever he went because they saw his miraculous signs as he healed the sick. So, back to the next slide, I might have just a little bit of location. That's not very good map, is it? I mean, that could be anywhere. That was the best I could find. But essentially, so Jesus took his disciples away for a bit of a debrief. The Sea of Galilee, you can probably just about see it's at the top part of that little blue circle in the middle of the land. The land that's outlined is Israel. The Sea of Galilee is in the top. You can see it's not really a sea, it's a lake. So that's the Mediterranean on the left-hand side. So it's more of a lake. It's about 13 miles long. So it's not even a that big a lake, not really deep. Used for fishing a lot, and it got called the Sea of Tiberias because Tiberius was the second Roman emperor. They changed the name to this place after him. And if you skip forward, Tiberias is still there. You can go, that's a holiday snap. You can go there if you want to Tiberias. That's on the coast of the Sea of Galilee. So that is still there, or the Sea of Tiberias. And I don't know if I've got something else to flip forward or more. I think, yeah, that's a satellite shot if you're interested in that. So what's that? That's all my holiday stands. Yes. So as you look at it as a clock face, the top right, where 1 o'clock would be, that's where Jesus had headed with his disciples. He'd crossed the lake and gone to that top right corner. That's called the Golan Heights today. That's a very mountainous, hilly area. And it's also the area where there's a little town called Bethsaida, which is where some of Jesus' disciples came from. Philip, Andrew, Peter, they all came from that area. So for a few of them, it was a bit like going home. For others, it was a bit of a holiday type place where they're going up to the mountains, nice views. So that's the setting for this. Okay, next slide. So we move on. It says, Jesus climbed a hill and he sat down with his disciples around him. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover feast. So John mentions the Jewish Passover a couple of times during this. The Jewish Passover happened in March, April time in the year. So it's nice and warm there, 24 degrees. Nice. Sitting on a hillside, a little bit good. And the Passover, for those of you that don't know, is where God rescued his people, the Israelites, out of slavery in Egypt. And saved them, and then he fed them, and he looked after them for 40 years in the desert after that. So that's the time of year when Jesus, his disciples, and all the Jews were looking at celebrating this Passover feast. So that's the place and the time. That's what happened. So, yeah, next slide. We're on to verse 5. Jesus, this is as they sat down, Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. So turning to Philip, one of his disciples, he asked him, where can we buy food? Where can we buy bread to feed all these people? And he was testing Philip because he already knew what he was going to do. And Philip replied, even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them. So in the Bible it says it gives an amount of money, 200 dinars, which is like 8 months' work. So even if we were to work for 8 months, we wouldn't be able to feed them. So Jesus didn't get his rest. I don't know how you are, if you've planned a time of rest and then something happens. I don't think I would have been as gracious as Jesus, you know. You have these times set aside for some rest and then something happens. And the last thing I'm thinking is, well, how can I feed all these people? That was what Jesus did. So there was a huge crowd. They followed Jesus for various reasons. Some saw his miracles, just like that sort of stuff. Some followed because it was a thing to do. You know, where are we going? Oh, right, Jesus, okay, yeah, thousands of them. And some followed because they were searching for something. So they've heard some of Jesus' teaching and they thought, actually, I want to hear some more of this. So there was a big crowd that came. Jesus had compassion on the crowd. And Jesus sees an opportunity in this. He sees an opportunity not only to meet a physical need, so how are we going to feed all these people? So Jesus has compassion on them and says, they're going to go hungry, aren't they? There's going to be chaos, literally there's going to be chaos. How can we feed these guys? And he also sees an opportunity to teach his disciples and the people something of who he is. So he asks Philip this question. So Philip was a local chap. He lived just not far from there. So Jesus says to him, where can we go to get food for these guys? And Philip's answer is probably what my answer would be. Are you joking? Look at how many people there are. even if we had, 6, 8 months' wages, we couldn't buy enough food for all those people. Are you mad? It's never going to happen. Right, let's move on to then the next verse, chapter 8 says, then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. What good is that with this huge crowd? Those of you that know Andrew in the Bible, you know he's a guy that was always bringing people to Jesus. So in John here, he initially brings Peter, his brother, to Jesus in chapter 1. And then towards the end of John, he brings some Greeks to Jesus, which is just the start really of the final chapters in John. And then here, he's bringing this young boy to Jesus. So something this does, it's almost like if he sees things in his life he's not sure about, and he's like, I'm going to just take this to Jesus, let's just see what happens. Barley, he mentions barley there, doesn't it? Barley, we don't hear so much about barley today. Barley was a crop that was used much more then. It was, as it survived to eat better, but it was considered the poor. It was a poor person's food. Barley was, so they had barley loaves, and it was always held in less esteem than wheat and all the other things. So folks that had a lot of barley loaves, it would be generally a sign that they were poorer. And the Passover feast started when the barley harvest started. So we've got this barley harvest, and then the harvest starts, and that's the beginning of Passover. And what they do at the beginning of Passover is they get this first barley harvest, they take it to the priest, and the priest offers it up as an offering to God. That's the start of Passover. Okay, let's move on. Verse, there we are. Barley loaves and 2 little fish, something like that. They would probably been flat without any leaven or any yeast in them at that time. So that's them. And there's a lot of people. Tell everyone to sit down, Jesus says when he gets hold of his bread and fish. He says to us, they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered around 5,000. So most of you will know in those days they only counted the men. So they didn't count women and children, for whatever reason. So they estimate, when you look at folks estimate sort of culture and population there, that for every man, there would have been between 4 and 6 women and children. So do the maths. That's somewhere between 20 and 30. A lot of people, isn't it? Yeah. So 20 or 30,000 people, and you've got, go back a slide, please. Thanks. 2 little fish, 5 little loaves. Okay, on we go. So then Jesus took the loaves, and he gave thanks to God, and he distributed them to all the people, and afterwards, he did the same with the fish, and they all ate as much as they wanted. After everyone was full, Jesus told his disciples, now gather the leftovers, so nothing is wasted. So he picked up the pieces and filled 12 baskets with scraps left by the people who had eaten from the 5 barley loaves. And when the people saw him do this miraculous sign, they exclaimed, surely he is the prophet we have been expecting. And when Jesus saw that they were ready to force him to be their king, he slipped away into the hills by himself. That's the feeding of the 5,000. Now that's an amazing story, isn't it? It's a story probably known by most people, whether or not they've been to church through their lives or not, about Jesus feeding 5,000 people with a few loaves and a couple of fish. And it is an amazing story. It is an amazing thing that he did. But Jesus didn't just do miracles to like amaze people. Jesus didn't go around doing random miracles just to amaze people. Because I mean, if you think about it, he could have done much bigger things than that. He could have created the universe. Actually, multiplying a few loaves of bread and fish to feed a few people is not in his scheme of things. If he wanted to wow people, that's probably not what he was going to pick to do. You know, that's not the biggest thing to think of. And when you look at Jesus' life on earth, he followed a pattern, and actually it was this week I heard someone say it. It said that this is the pattern of Jesus' life. Jesus blessed the crowd and taught his disciples. And actually that's what you see all through the scriptures. You see Jesus bless his people, blesses the crowd, and then he teaches his disciples, he teaches those that follow him. So, we're Jesus' disciples, aren't we? So what's John saying to us in this? What's he want to teach us in this, other than the amazing miracle that he did? And I think there's a question, and it's got to start it out with, I think there's a question that Jesus would ask us today from the passage. And that question is, do you trust me? Do you trust me? Do you trust me that I can supply all your needs? I don't know what your needs are today. I don't know if that's healing or refreshing, money, relationships. But that's the question I think God would ask is, do you trust me? Am I enough? And I think our faith can be different at different levels throughout different times in our life, guys. So I might ask you that, and myself that question at one point in my life, and I'll say definitely, and at another point, or about a different thing, and I might be less sure. So I want to look at 3 people from this story who are at sort of different stages, and you might be able to identify with one of those people, with where you're at with things in your life at the moment. And if not, it's just an interesting look at some of Jesus' disciples and people in the story. We're going to start by looking at Philip. Philip was a local lad, as I said, and this is what in the story John shows us. Jesus comes to him and says, "Where can we get food for all these people?" And his response is basically to look at the crowds and to say, "Are you serious about this? Have you seen the size of that crowd? Even if there was a shop locally that we could walk to that had enough bread to feed this many people, we couldn't carry it back, and more importantly, we haven't even got enough money. And even if we did have enough money, practically, Jesus, how would we do that?" You know, that's his response. And what it says is interesting in this story, isn't it? It says Jesus asked. Jesus knew the answer. He asked Philip to test him. But that's not a pass-fail test. Do you know? It wasn't that Jesus said to Philip, "Where can we get it?" Philip gave his answer, and Jesus said, "Right, off you go back home to your place. You failed." It wasn't that, was it? He was saying it so that what actually Philip believed, what was in his heart, what he actually believed would come out. That's the test. So what he was saying was he asked Philip this question to see Philip's response, because that reveals actually what he believes. So Philip, 5 minutes before, might say, "Yeah, I trust you, Jesus, no problem at all." But actually Jesus did this to test that faith in him. And the reason that Jesus wants to do that is because he wants us to really see where we're at. That's why Jesus tests us. Not as a pass-fail, but to see where we're really at, because his desire is to move us to a place of trust, and he can only do that when we actually see where we're at that time. And now you only have to look at the rest of Philip's life to see that actually this wasn't a pass test thing. Philip went on to evangelize nations, and he died as a martyr. He was crucified like Jesus was as a martyr. This guy grew in his faith and his trust in Jesus. So if that's you at the moment, if there's something in your life, or if in general in your life, you're in a position where if Jesus says, "Can you trust me in this?" and you say, "Seriously, Jesus, I mean, just look at it. Look at that situation. There is no way." And looking at all the practicality. If that's you, what do you do? Well, we're going to look at the next guy. We're going to look at Andrew next. I ran out of time to do the slides, which is one of the slides. Sorry. Andrew. So Andrew was another local boy. He was from this local town. And as I say, he always used to bring people to Jesus. That's what he did. And he wasn't always entirely sure what Jesus would do. And he still had plenty of doubts, didn't he, here? So he brings this boy, he finds this boy in the crowd, and he brings him to Jesus. And he says, look, here's a boy, he's got 5 loaves and 2 fish. And then it's like he stops and says, what use is that for all these people? So he takes that initial step, and there's an initial sense of, if I bring it to Jesus, something's going to happen. But then he gets those sort of doubts, doesn't he? And says, well, yeah, but I think that's the thing I learned from Andrew is about taking stuff to Jesus. So actually the whole point is that Jesus didn't expect Andrew to figure out how it was going to work. It wasn't. He wanted it. And in the same in our lives, he wants us to take those things to him in trust. And I think that's okay to take stuff to God and be saying, I don't know how you're going to work this out, God, but I'm bringing it to you. And we bring stuff to God in prayer, don't we? That's on our own, and also praying with others about things. And I'll encourage you to do that. So I think if you're in the place of Philip, where you just got no faith or no trust in situations at the moment, and we all go through that, take a lesson from Andrew and just take it to Jesus. Even if you can't see an answer, grab someone else from church and just take it all to Jesus in prayer. Do it on your own, in your own life, and see what Jesus does. And just this week, I was reminded actually about corporate prayer. Someone I was listening to was saying that corporate prayer, praying together rather than on our own, and actually they were saying that the Lord's Prayer is a corporate prayer. It's a prayer that we say together, isn't it? Our Father, who art in heaven. When Jesus taught us how to pray, he was teaching us how to pray as a group. Give us our daily bread, forgive us our sins. So I think there's something powerful about praying together, corporate prayer. And then the last person in the story is a small boy. That's what he's called. We don't even know his name. It was a small boy. It's interesting, isn't it, that it was a child, not an adult, it was a child that Jesus chose to use to demonstrate something, to demonstrate faith. He was insignificant in this crowd. So we would go back to the numbers. He wasn't even included in those 5,000 numbers. Like, not only is he nameless, but he wasn't even like a figure. You know, he was nothing in the story in that sense. And he was poor, wasn't he? So he got barley loaves. So you've got a poor, small, nameless boy. I think there's something about God's kingdom in that. That God uses the least and the lowest and the smallest and the nameless and those with very little to do great things. God multiplies, doesn't he? Our little bits we can take to him. What would have happened, I wonder, if that small boy hadn't responded to this strange man that came up to him to meet him and see Jesus? Bring him to see Jesus. What would have happened if he just sort of stood up into the crowd and says, no, not a chance. This is my land, get back to my land. And I don't think Jesus fought him for it, you know. Come on, give me your do a miracle here. It wasn't like that, was it? You know, if this boy gave him his food in expectation, who knows of what, but in expectation that Jesus could do something. That Jesus could do something with his little offering. And as it turns out, I mean, Steve alluded to it. I'm not going on to the rest of today of John 6, but it's some of the most amazing teaching of Jesus and who he is in the whole of the Bible. That's what comes out of this miracle. So this little boy with next to nothing, in the world's eyes insignificant, gives what he has to Jesus, and out of that comes some of the most foundational teaching of our faith. And we're still talking about a small boy 2,000 years later. And I think this This is what God desires, isn't it, from this story? God desires us to be as children, that 100% trust. 100% trust in our Father who has got us, who is holding our hands and won't let us go, and uses the small things. I think that's important in this story. If there is ever a story of small things being used for great, it's the story of feeding the 5,000 with a few little tiny little loaves and a couple of fish. So I don't know if there's anyone here that's got small things that they're doing, perhaps, and they're wondering what use it is, or if there's folks here with things that they're not sure about giving over to God because they're not sure what it's worth. I encourage us to be thinking about that boy. He could have done the same, but what's the point? He could have done what Philip said, or what Andrew said. Well, what use is this? And I think Jesus does say to us, it's the small things. It's often the small things. And I know Richard, when he did his talk on kindness, it's the small things that God uses in his kingdom. The whole of the kingdom of God is about small things. It's about seeds growing. It's about small things that God using for great. It's about seemingly unseen or actually unseen people in the world's eyes that God uses for great things. So, just going to finish by looking, essentially the whole Bible is about God wanting us to trust him, desiring for us to trust him. That's what the whole Bible is about. It's about a God who longs for his children to trust him in everything. And I think it's easy to see how that, if we have that, or the more we have that in our lives, changes everything. A bit like the child who's holding onto their father's hands and trusting completely in their father. That changes where you go, doesn't it? It changes how you approach everything. Rickety old bridge or a storm or whatever it is, it changes everything. Your faith is that your Father has you, has your hand. John mentioned that this happened at Passover. He touched on that. And John doesn't mention anything, just in passing. Everything that's in there is there for a reason. And it's difficult to believe that he doesn't want us to, in some way, look at Passover with this whole story, this whole scene. And of course, in Passover, God provided food for his people. For those of you that don't know the story that well, God's people, the Israelites, were in a desert for 40 years. No water, no food, just a desert, wandering around. And God literally provided them food from heaven. It was like dew on the ground every morning. And they literally went out and picked up the food from the ground, just enough for the day. And for the whole of 40 years, God provided them with food. And there's a passage in Deuteronomy that explains that a bit more. So I just want to read that. Deuteronomy is a book in the Old Testament. And this is speaking to God's people about that time when they were in this desert, when they were having to trust God every day for food. Because there was no food they could go out and get. And it says this, it says, yes, God humbled you by letting you go hungry and then feeding you with manna, the food that you previously didn't know about. He did it to teach you that people don't live by bread alone. Rather, we live by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. For all these 40 years, your clothes didn't wear out. Your feet didn't blister or swell. Think about it. Just as a parent disciplines a child, the Lord your God disciplines you for your own good. So obey the commands of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and by fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, of flowing streams and pools of water, with fountains and springs that gush out in the valleys and hills. It's a land of wheat and barley, of grapevines, fig trees and pomegranates, of olive oil and honey. It's a land where food is plentiful and nothing is lacking. And you shall eat and be full, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good things he has given you. And that's what Jesus is saying in this story to us, I think. You know, that just like the Israelites, God has provided for us in this journey. Now, this wilderness that we go through, this is what our life is, in a sense. It's a journey to the kingdom. It's a journey to that promised land that Jesus has promised to us. And Jesus is that bread. Jesus is the bread of life, which is what he goes on to explain in the rest of that chapter. That he is the bread. Jesus is the word that he talks about in there, the word of God. And through his death on the cross, our sins are dealt with, and through his resurrection from the dead, we are raised from the dead. Death is defeated, isn't it? So then when the tests of faith come, it's not a pass-fail test. It's because God is desiring that we know what's in our own hearts, so that we can take steps with it and put in our trust and our faith in him. I want to finish with a story that I heard just this last week, a story of a businessman who was on his way home from a business trip in the States, and so he was flying back to his home state. And as it was a stormy night, as he got on the plane, he was wondering if it might even happen, and it did, and he was sat next to a young girl, a very young girl, who was surprised that she was on her own. She had no parents or anyone with her. He was just sat next to her. He didn't say anything, and the flight took off. And about halfway through the flight, they started hitting this turbulence, and the seatbelt signs came on. And the captain came over the tannoy and said, "Look, can you strap yourself in, it's going to get a bit rough." And it got more and more rocky, and the plane was shaking. He was going to fall apart, and there were people crying, screaming, and the guy next to this girl was just clutching his chair, so like her knuckles were white. His knuckles were white. The girl sat next to him, and the little girl was just sat there, totally calm. Hands on her lap, just not bothered at all by all this. Anyway, 20 minutes later, it sort of subsided, and the seatbelt lights went off, and the captain came over the tannoy and said, we're through the worst of it, and we're just going to be starting our descent soon. So a couple of minutes later, they started descending, and the guy couldn't help himself. He just turned to this girl and he said, "You know, you are probably the bravest person I've ever met. Everyone was screaming and crying, and yet you were sat there completely calm. Why is that?" And the little girl just looked at him and said, "Well, my dad's the pilot, and he's taking me home." I think that's isn't it, in this life. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you are the God that holds our hand and doesn't let it go. You're a God that does things to test our faith so that you can take us to new levels of faith and trust. Thank you that you're a God that's trustworthy. That when we put our trust in you, you don't let us down. Thank you, Father, that you are the Father that is taking us home. And you have promised to do that. Promised to finish the work that you have started in us. So I thank you for that. And I pray for each one of us here, wherever we are on that journey, even now, or wherever we are with different situations in our lives, that Holy Spirit, you would challenge us. You would give us the courage and strength to step out in faith, trusting you, Jesus, that we can live lives of trust walking with you. In Jesus' name, amen.